Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the analytics category. I'm super excited to be talking with Tracy. She's the CEO of Astarte Medical. Tracy, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having us, Kyle.
To give context again, why we're having this interview. So now we spent a lot of time looking at well over hundreds of different companies that were considered a part of the analytics category. It breaks apart in a lot of different ways, but one of the companies that really stood out to us was Astarte Medical, and a lot of different reasons why. One, they have a unique focus. They're taking a very specific problem in patient care, and they're doing it in a way that is very unique. It's not about just the data that they pull, the database that they're creating, but also the workflow that they're providing for providers themselves. So it's really impressive. I'm super excited to be talking about this. So Tracy, before we start, you provided us with a really great video that at least gives the audience kind of a visual baseline of who is Astarte Medical. So we're going to jump to that real quick, and then we'll get into questions about the cool factors of Astarte Medical. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Thanks to advancements in modern medicine, survival rates for preterm infants continue to improve. Unfortunately, many preterm infants do not grow after birth for many days, and their subsequent growth does not keep up with normal fetal growth rates. Optimal nutrition early in life can positively impact not only physical growth, but also neurological development. Attention is now turning to the quality of survival through optimal nutrition management. Learning how to grow preterm infants has been riddled with complexities and questions for clinical professionals. Providing the preterm infant with optimal nutrition to achieve the same growth and development of the healthy, growing fetus is the next imperative in neonatal critical care, and we need to address it now. Successful progression from parenteral to enteral to oral feeding is key to achieving appropriate growth and development, but calculating proper nutrition with the right amounts of energy and macro and micronutrients is complex and time-consuming. Even though providers know nutrition is important, neonatologists tend to be intensivists focused on acute critical care problems and don't always devote sufficient attention to nutrition as a critical care requirement. With so many different nutrition and feeding protocols, a growing catalog of available dietary options, and lack of standardization, it's difficult to make a truly informed decision. Nutrition expertise is housed in consensus-based protocols and in the experience of neonatal nutrition experts. But experts aren't always accessible when nutrition and feeding don't go as expected, and a personalized approach is needed. Unlike the rest of neonatology, current tools do not provide precise feedback to support nuanced clinical decisions about nutrition and feeding. Let us help you think about your daily nutrition goals as intensively as you think about ventilator settings, medication changes, and central line placement. NICUtrition is a real-time clinical decision support tool to monitor and analyze feeding and nutrition delivery. It is designed to extract feeding and nutritional data directly from your hospital's electronic health record. NICUtrition allows clinical teams to track improvements in feeding milestones and test quality improvement outcomes over time and quantify the correlated patient outcomes for an individual baby or the entire NICU. NICUtrition can help you navigate the details and make the best decisions as experts in neonatal nutrition. NICUtrition specifically supports a dietitian's work, making nutrition management more efficient and more easily understood by visual numeric and graphic presentations. Additionally, a hospital's own enteral feeding protocol can be digitally implemented to promote compliance and overcome the challenges of time-consuming manual processes of entering details of feeding, nutrient supply, and specific outcomes. Together, we can make nutrition management smarter, personalized, and data-driven, because each baby is unique and deserves the best possible start for their future. Let us support you in your work to grow healthy babies and help them go home as soon and as safely as possible.
Tracy, awesome video. Before I even jump into some questions that I had, I'm just curious, is there a backstory about why you started this company?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think it's one of the things that makes us relatively unique in this space. So my co-founder and I are actually former venture capitalists, and sort of as part of our interest in women and infant health, had met our scientific co-founder, who's a newborn ICU nurse, which is probably one of the toughest jobs out there in clinical care, and is also a PhD researcher at Harvard, running work in the microbiome lab. So she's just a unique, amazing individual, Kate Gregory. And it was really her vision of how much data she was collecting and documenting at the bedside as a nurse, and how much data she was generating in her research around nutrition and feeding and gut health, where she came to us and said, these two huge elements of data need to come together to create better insights. Because there are so many things known in our patient population, which is preterm infants, right? These very, very tiny people. So much is done for the heart and the lungs, but the gut, which is really the gateway to the brain and to development, we're really doing it very based on symptoms at the bedside and very kind of high practice variability in how to feed, when to feed, what to feed. And she felt that data, large data and insights could create significant improvements in care and really help these babies get the best start in life.
Really interesting. You know, it's interesting for healthcare itself because a lot of the backstory behind many companies is very personal, and especially in this case, sometimes it's a very important problem that can be a matter of life or death, and I think that really can be a driver for companies like yourself about you know, the background of your existence, and it's awesome. Jumping in now to the product itself, and at the start, the baseline that we saw from the video is being able to have a feeding audit and monitoring solution, especially for prenatal care. I'm just curious, how did you build out this functionality? Like, where did this information come from to be able to know what is the right workflow to take care of infants at this stage?
Yeah, and it's an interesting field because I actually think as data grows and as tools like ours are deployed, we're going to see a tremendous amount of focus on this. So to give you a lay of land, every hospital, and we focus on what are called level 3 and level 4 NICUs. So they take care of the very tiniest babies out there. These weigh hundreds of grams. They're 23 weeks gestation. They're very, very tiny. And a huge amount of thought goes into when to initiate feed and when to feed and advance more quickly. But each hospital has what they call a feeding guideline or a feeding protocol. And it literally is site specific, which is unfortunate in many ways. And I'll come back to why. But they sit around the table in committee and they develop these feeding protocols and they push them out, usually in a PDF or a index card. And folks carry them around and say, okay, this baby is this weight, this age, or certain parameters, I should feed this amount. And to give you a sense, these kids are fed usually every 2 or 3 hours, very, very small amounts. So 2 cc's of breast milk or donor milk or formula. And then it's advanced as the baby grows and can tolerate more and more nutrition, because the goal is to really get kids off of parenteral or IV nutrition and start to use their gut. And so how to do this, each hospital has sort of ordained its own feeding protocol. And even within a health system, we're finding that different sites have different protocols. And part of that is because the literature is really lacking in what is the best way to feed these kids. And that's where data and real world data and large data sets can really start to inform clinical care. And that's really our vision with NICU Nutrition. We'll use your protocol, but then we're going to feed that data back to you to help you advance your thinking and also to benchmark your hospital or even your system against others to start to drive sort of a national best standard or best practice.
Wow. It's interesting to see how the process, you know, especially for the feeding process, it's what seems like a very manual process and very hospital or provider specific and what is the right method of care. And I think it's really important that aspect of how you compare these different protocols against a variety of different hospitals and help guide a lot of providers. Very interesting. Now you have really big ambitions of building out a handful of data sets that are going to support, you know, provider workflows. And I'm curious if you could talk about those and why they're important.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, as I said, we're starting really in what we consider standardization of care, reducing practice variability, looking at compliance to protocol, and then driving the informing of new protocols based on that data. But not only does it matter what you feed a little baby or even an adult at this stage, right, is the variability among patients, right? So our babies are very heterogeneous. They are born at different parts of their gestation. They're different days of life old. Some, there are gender differences, et cetera. And so when you think about that from a nutrition perspective, just like men and women have different metabolisms, babies are very similar, right? Very high energy needs. And how do you know exactly what to do? So in addition to the clinical data that we're collecting through NICU Nutrition, we're pairing that with gut microbiome data. And really, we've brought in from three top academic medical centers a very integrated data set where it has longitudinal clinical data, so what the baby was fed, antibiotics, risk factors for mom, and we've correlated that to how their guts developed. And I think that's really the frontier for us, is bringing together deep, rich, longitudinal data sets on what has been successful and helping to apply that to improve clinical care. And so that is in our next frontier that we'll be taking on beyond NICU Nutrition. And all of that really leverages data that's already collected as part of routine care. So there's no change to the workflow whatsoever.
Really interesting. I mean, that is really, when you think about what is the future of personalized care, I mean, you guys are taking it to a whole different level. I kind of want to go back a little bit, and you highlighted the process before about what is prior to working with you guys. What are that manual? It seems like, especially feeding, is very, very manual process, individual specific. What are the most common problems that you're seeing with that traditional process? And having your platform in play, what's changed? How have you been able to solve those common problems that a lot of these providers are facing?
We think so. And I think, to your point on the manual process, as I mentioned, so all the way from, neonatologist ordering nutrition, the content, the rates, all of these sort of decisions that need to be made, that trickles down all the way to the nurses doing each individual feed, right? Preparing, usually they're fed via a syringe, via a tube to the gut, because our babies can't suck, swallow, breathe. So it's a highly, highly intensive process. So beyond vital signs, it is the most frequent thing that happens to our babies once they're stable. And so we, in the history, right, nurses prepare it, they deliver the feed, they document the feed, but EMRs actually have not been built to capture feeding. It's usually not something that's as readily understood from a workflow perspective. And so there was a huge amount of burden that was created with the advent of medical records. It's great for us as a data company, but the workflow, especially to the nursing staff, has been incredibly burdensome. And so one of the key features of our platform is that we are EMR integrated, and we liberate all that data. We organize it in a way that matches the workflow, both for the nurse in delivering the care, but also for the neonatologist on rounds and looking at what was ordered, what was delivered, how did my baby grow. And so we've pulled all of those kind of disparate pieces that were broken up as part of the implementation of electronic medical records. And we then present that in a much more workflow friendly, bringing together and overlaying their protocol. So what does your protocol say you should do? There's still entirely clinical decision support. So we have not taken any of the training away from our docs, but given them data faster, in a more consistent way, and in a way that I think helps them spend more time thinking about the decisions instead of grabbing all the data, doing patient record review, and all of that sort of tedious nature. We help them sort of practice top of license. And I think that's where our clinicians get really excited that nutrition can now be a form of medicine if we can practice it in the best informed way. And that's really how we built the system.
Interesting. I mean, and this is one of the reasons why we thought you were one of the best companies within the analytics category. It's not just, there is one aspect of just being able to pull data, but being able to integrate it into a workflow and provide guidance to a lot of these providers, I think is in helping a lot of processes, especially in your case, prenatal care. And it's really exciting. And I kind of want to take that point specifically on the workflow. Now, one of the things that we're seeing for a lot of analytics tools is, how far can we go with supporting providers and telling them what they should or shouldn't do? And what is your thoughts on, is your goal really just to give them all the tools and data, quality data necessary to make the right decisions? And I think you kind of highlighted it. You're not trying to change the protocol. And then how far do you go on the other side of the spectrum with, whether are you providing recommendations? Are you telling them or suggesting them what they should do? Or are you taking that workflow over entirely and saying, don't do that protocol, do this? And I'll add more questions on top of that. I apologize.
Yeah.
And what do providers feel? Are they comfortable with that if you're providing recommendations or guidance? And is that really helpful for them?
Yeah, so maybe two parts of the question. So we are starting with standardization because I think there's so much calculations, chart review. There's so much, quite frankly, tedious efforts as it relates to preparing for rounds and preparing to feed these kids. And it's a really, really critical patient population. So preemies are in the NICU for 2.5 months. They're really, really intensively cared for. And so to spend your time gathering data seems like a low-hanging fruit, to use that term, right? So we're starting in standardization because I think it immediately adds value to the workflow, to the outcomes. There have been studies shown that you can improve outcomes as such as reducing length of stay, getting kids off parenteral or IV nutrition, reducing central line associated bloodstream infections just by giving them better data. So for us, that's where we start. But I think you're exactly right. We're going to build then a very well-validated data set from which we can then glean. If you are a 26-week-old Black baby girl, how is it best to feed you if mother's milk is not available? What is that pathway? But you need big data to do it. And the clinical trials today have not done that. So we want to do an evidence-based data set before we make those recommendations. As you can appreciate in this patient population, data rules the day. Strong studies, big data sets, highly powered. People don't take chances with these babies who are on the edge of viability. So we will work our way into making those recommendations. They will be entirely evidence-based, and certainly would be under scrutiny of studies, and likely if we go to making recommendations through FDA so that we can feel confident in the recommendations we're making. Today, we're simply providing a rules engine to what's needed to just provide better information. So we're starting a little short of that today.
Interesting. No, it definitely, it's exciting. I mean, especially with the ambitions and the data set that you're building, but starting with the process where what was manual and data was siloed and there was no simple way to even view this information. I mean, it's incredible what you are already doing and what you can do in the future. And with that, I'm curious because it seems like sometimes some healthcare software solutions have a difficult time implementing their tools with the providers. And I'm curious, what does that implementation process look like to you? At a provider, are they have you used a separate platform and a different tool, or is this? Earlier you mentioned that you can easily integrate in with the EMRs, and so it seems like it's not a difficulty for you. But I'm just curious, what does that implementation process look like?
Yeah, I hope I didn't say easily implement, because I'm not sure anyone can easily implement with an EMR. So, but in all seriousness, we went through the process of going through Epic's App Orchard. And so we are listed in the App Orchard. So we have worked extremely closely with Epic. We're about to get our Cerner certification as well, which is about 80% of our market. So we took on sort of that big validation need with the actual EMR providers themselves as a step, because I think it's important for us when we go to an IT team within a hospital who's protecting their EMR, to let them know that we've been vetted and to let them know that we meet all the requirements that will be synergistic. And the fact that we fit right into that workflow and you don't have to log out and go into another application goes to that entire workflow. No way in a critical care setting could we require someone to go into another application. It would be impractical. So we did that as part of our early product requirements. So we do get, I would say, greater support from IT groups within a hospital, knowing that we've been vetted by their vendor. It still is about resource competition, right? So especially in COVID, right? Everything was shelved that wasn't COVID. So you do still have resource allocations. And I do think IT groups are one of the least well-staffed within the hospital systems. And getting, the ability to turn things quickly is just difficult because of all the competing pressures. We are seeing that start to ease up a bit. I think everybody having gone through the COVID, telehealth, things had to start to move quickly. So hopefully I think we'll see a faster pace going forward, but we still have to get all of our requirements, all of our security and all the standard things. But I do think that integration piece, we get a bump from having spent time with the top vendors and going through their processes and making sure that we fit well with that system.
Interesting. Yeah, it's you make it seem easy. I could imagine it's not.
Don't tell my CTO I said that. He'll kill me.
Well, it's an interesting space that you're in, especially and generally being an analytics category. Patient care is a very sensitive area. And for a lot of hospitals, there's always this concern about, it feels like from provider standpoint, sometimes there's a concern about liability. What happens if you're following a software solution that provides the wrong recommendation, or, it doesn't, tell you what you should be doing in the right way, or may have been confusion or something, and that results in, misdiagnosis, death even, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach that? Do you feel that from the customers that you work with? And, how do you approach that issue? And is that even an issue at all for you?
So I think it's always an issue. You have to be cognizant of it for sure when you're providing information to a clinical team, and especially in our case, in a critical care setting, right? To your point, these are life and death patients who really can be quite critical, very quickly. The difference with, I think, NICU nutrition today is that we're, again, using the own rules and recommending according to a hospital's rules, but we are still allowing for, if you will, modifications, right? So if a provider gets to the bedside and decides he or she does not want to feed this baby today because its belly's distended or whatever, we record it and we mark it as, here we capture why, which is really important, I think, to hospitals to understand that variability is driven by observations and learnings. And I think that feeds into, over time, understanding that decision-making and that variability better. But we stop short of giving a diagnosis, giving a recommendation today, because quite frankly, the data isn't there in an organized way to make that recommendation with high confidence. So I think we'll get there, but today there would be we would not be comfortable giving recommendations ad hoc. We would want it to be based on something that's been consensus driven from our clients, so that we can just provide that information to their experts.
Interesting. Yeah, it definitely, especially as your ambitions of building out an incredible data set, I think that'll be really, really helpful in navigating that space too. And patient care's analytics, because I'm curious, what does your business model look like? Is it contingent on, the success of care? Is this a traditional SaaS model? Is it per patient? We've seen a lot of the telemedicine and health management tools and, how that relates to payers, but patient care analytics it's very unique. So I'm just curious, what is that model?
Well, starting out, we are a SaaS company, and we actually tier our products. So I think in the video you saw, we have different layers of analytics, and whether or not you integrate your protocol or not. So you can imagine sort of a grid by tier. We tier our pricing as well to hospital size so that we can meet some of the smaller units and their resource requirements. So we are SaaS. We've looked at risk, where if we reduce length of stay or improve certain outcomes, would hospital partners be interested in that? I don't think there's enough knowledge out there yet on how to structure those and measure those. And certainly at top centers that are always doing quality improvement, some of those measurements can get difficult. So I think we're open to risk-based programs in the future. We don't see an appetite in our customers for them today. That having been said, a lot of our babies are under DRGs or other, it's not always as similar as some of the other things where if you directly reduce cost, there's an alignment with the health system. So we'll get there, I think. Certainly, I do think this is a very expensive patient population, usually one of the top three from an inpatient perspective. And so there will be focus on how to optimize care. We're a little bit early.
Wow, I didn't know that. One of the most expensive inpatient care. At least top three.
Yes.
Wow. Well, it's interesting. And I'm curious. You alluded to this earlier, and we talked about it a little bit before the call. But we all know healthcare software is notorious for having really long sales cycles. It's difficult to work with providers. It seems like you have a clear value add, and I couldn't imagine how providers wouldn't want to sign up directly tomorrow. But do you feel as though there's a long sales cycle on your side? And if so, how do you manage or navigate that process?
Yeah, I mean, we've always, in all of our kind of estimates and projections, 12 to 18 months, I think, is the canned expectation. Surprisingly, post-COVID, and this is certainly just in the last 60 or 90 days, we've seen an interest. So we formally launched the product in this summer. We've seen an interest and actually are getting to proposals in 45 to 60 days. So I'm actually a little bit hopeful that we can shorten that cycle now that folks are feeling the need for data and better information and having it available to everyone at all times, especially as you see resource constraints in kind of the post-COVID world with budget impact. That having been said, I don't know what the IT side of this looks like. So I do think part of that sales cycle has to actually do with all the approvals. And that's still a little bit of a black box for us right now. So I think we could get lower, shorter sales cycle. Certainly for us, our babies are still being born and need to be cared for. It's not an elective kind of situation. So I do think we're seeing a resurgence in interest of bringing in tools to deliver better care. But it's a half-baked story right now. So I'm hoping we get to like 3 to 6 months if I got to choose.
Wow. Well, it seems as though for some companies it has long sales cycles, and for others, if it's obvious that clear value add, it's much shorter. And I think for you it's going to be much shorter. But you talked a little bit about it already a few times, and just in your past comments. But I'm just curious, how has the pandemic affected your company?
Well, obviously, I think in March through probably June or July, it was a complete freeze from it, just out of respect for the frontline workers to not call on hospitals. So we did sort of, again, we hadn't officially launched, so we sort of slow rolled some of our announcements and some of our products and promotional activities during that period of time in respect of the demands on folks' times. We implemented a hiring freeze here at the company. So we're a venture-backed company and just wanted to make sure cash runway was lasting. But by and large, it actually allowed us to take a bit of a pause and look at the product and really make some, I think, informed features decision making. So all in all, it's been less impactful than I think it has been for other groups. But again, our patient population is consistent and critical. And so it's been less of an impact than I think if we've been an adult population or in an elective field. But who knows, again, I think there's a huge backlog in the IT groups, and I'm really wondering how all that gets cleared up as things start to reopen, and how budgets ultimately get affected by the, kind of the financial crisis that some hospitals have experienced.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, babies are still being born.
They are.
There's no pause.
Right.
You can't pause on that issue. And so I think it still is a very, very important topic. I think is still at the front of providers' mind. But it's definitely it's interesting. The healthcare industry itself going through a very turbulent period that has a lot of silver linings in some sense, and then also a lot of reflection about what is the right way to manage. And you know, you're seeing that on all fronts. And I think net benefit, it's going to cause a lot more net benefits than negatives. So I'm very positive on the outlook as well. You know, with that, I'm curious, what is, and I apologize, I always say I'm curious is my preface to the next question, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this. You know, what do you think is the future of, you know, generally you're a part of the patient analytics category, but more, you can be more specific for, you know, preterm infant care. I mean, what do you think is the future of preterm infant care? And then what do you see that other people don't?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in our field see what we see. The problem is, I don't think they've ever been offered tools to do it. In many people's mind, it's a small market, no pun intended, right? But 380,000 babies are born preterm, you know, only 10% of the population. So I think what we've done well is focus on a market that's very addressable, high need. But I think for us as a company, when I step back, I think the idea of starting and staying healthy. So using things like nutrition as a very simple way, if you will, to create long-term health, right? Early in life, your immune system gets set, growth, neurodevelopment all takes place. And all that's driven by what you eat, how you're cared for, et cetera. So if we can control those things, kids get a much better start in life. So for us, the way to do that is to inform it with high quality data and large amounts of it. And I think that's maybe the fusion of those things is what we saw. There were a lot of groups doing, I'll call it pure analytics. What are the pathways by which patients go? And in our other side of our world, there were a lot of people looking at, you know, microbiome and probiotics and what to do. And we've kind of come at it from fusing those two data and saying, when you do this, what happens here and how do you bring those two together? And NIH has actually put out a precision nutrition roadmap for the next 10 years that I think is phenomenal, really giving better data of, it's not just calories, it's not just keto, it's not just gluten-free, you have to be more sophisticated, right? And so the way to do that is large data sets. And that's what I think we see. I don't think we're necessarily alone, but certainly in our patient population and in early life, we've been at the forefront of this. And I think this is keeping kids healthy, giving them the best start at life, and informing decisions with high quality data is the future of health, and hopefully will prevent chronic conditions. All of our kids having food allergies, just the things that are sort of plaguing kids today, using data and high quality information to do, to kind of get ahead of bad health and prevent it. That's kind of our vision.
Wow. Words of wisdom. I'm excited about your vision. I think it's incredible, and it's important to starting at the very, very earliest stages. Wow, this was fantastic, Tracy.
Thank you.
I really, this was a phenomenal interview. I'm curious, before I close out, did you have any other things that you want to announce to the audience, or requests, or anything that you want to recap?
Well, just a little bit. We did launch our product, as I said, so you saw the video. So, you know, obviously we're open for business. We are, as I mentioned, venture backed. We'll be kicking off our fundraising later this year for our financing next year, and really hope folks who are interested in kind of doing well by making a difference, you know, will contact us, both on the hospital and provider side, as well as investors and stakeholders. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to recap on my side, again, why we had this interview was because, you know, Astarte Medical was one of the best companies that we saw in the analytics category as a whole. And you got to see in detail why what their focus is on, especially in prenatal care, is really important, and how they've been able to take this process, which used to be very manual, or, you know, very individual to the provider, standardize it, build out a workflow. It's not just an analytics tool. We're actually helping a lot of these providers from end-to-end process of managing that feeding and monitoring of infants. And it's really impressive, the future roadmap that you have of building out what's going to be a really, really big data set that's going to make true personalized care. And so really impressive. Really, really
Thank you.
impressive, Tracy. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Of course.